I'm Richard Kauffman. I'm Chairman of Energy and Finance for New York State. Governor Cuomo calls me the state's energy czar. My very first year in college, I just saved up money to buy a car, was the time of the first energy crisis. And that was a long time ago. And it really informed my whole academic career, because at that point, when people were waiting in line for gas, it wasn't that there was a real shortage of gasoline. It was instead a result of bad regulations. But there were articles and studies at that point that talked about how there were going to be shortages of resources. And that led to, when I was in college and ultimately in graduate school, doing work on resources, natural resources. And some of that early academic work turns out not to have been correct in terms of shortage of oil. But the question of resources and how efficient we're going to be and what it means for economic development, not only in developed countries, but in the developing world, is still a critical question, because now it's much more about sustainability. And in my first job, when I got out of graduate school, I was involved in doing forecasting of energy prices. So I then went on a very long arc in business and finance. I wasn't an energy expert, although I did some energy work along the way. And a dozen years ago, because of my interest in climate change, I had the opportunity to lead a renewable energy investment firm called Good Energies. And that was my deeper return back to an arc that started quite a long time ago. Well, when I returned to the renewable energy world after what had been about, 35 years or 30 years, I was stunned with how little progress had been made. That in fact, the percentage of renewable energy that the U.S. had as a percentage of its total when I came back a dozen years ago was actually less than it had been 30 years prior. And I thought initially that the problem was about technology when I ran Good Energies. I thought, well, the real problem is that we need to, there has been a lack of investment in technology. And well, I'm not saying that technology, that we need to have more technological improvement. It was pretty clear to me from coming in from the outside that the problem was at least as much, in fact, put it more directly, I think the problem has with greater adoption of renewable energy and clean energy is more about regulations and policies to develop markets than technology itself. And so what I told the governor when he called me after Sandy is that he wanted, that we needed to think about a whole chain. I don't know if it's the right term, a food chain, because a food chain, I guess, is where animals eat each other. So that's not exactly the right analogy, but the whole idea that we need to align everything from innovation and policies to promote innovation all the way through to market development. And one of the problems I think we've had at both the federal level and in general and state level policy is not getting those policies in alignment. Certainly at the federal government, I would say over a long period of time, there's been an emphasis on investing in innovation, and it's great to invest in innovation, but we have lots of companies that have come up with innovative solutions, and the valley of death isn't always that they can't get enough capital to build a big factory. Another valley of death is just that it takes too long for them to get to market. And the reason they can't get to market is because there haven't been policies which develop markets. And we have policies which actually are truly a market failure. We have policies that create obstacles for clean energy solutions to come to market. And so I'll give a couple of examples of that. One is that there are significant embedded subsidies that fossil fuels companies enjoy. So when we say, well, renewable energy is more expensive than conventional energy sources, let's let the market decide. Well, actually, it's not a fair market. It's not a level playing field market because of the embedded cost of subsidies that the fossil fuel industry has long enjoyed. So that's an example where there's markets don't work very well. Obviously, there's no cost of carbon generally, and that's another example where markets don't work as well as they're supposed to work. Now, when we look at the power sector, and this is the thing that we're looking at in New York State under REV, there are a number of market obstacles which are preventing innovative energy solutions from occurring. Right now, as a simple example, under historical regulatory incentives, utilities are compensated for the quantum of capital that they deploy. So when you think about some technologies that have revolutionized the efficiency of other industries, which what I mean by that is think about revolutions in IT, or investments in bits, as it were. In fact, there's essentially an economic disincentive for utilities to make those kind of investments, which would make their system and customer systems not only more capital efficient or financially efficient, but also more energy efficient. It's because these investments, a utility would have no opportunity to earn a profit on. It would just be a cost that would be passed on to customers instead. So that's a simple example of a way that policies can inhibit the deployment of innovative technology. So we have to look at everything from policies to support innovation and connect the policies that support innovation through to market deployment. So Governor Cuomo really cares about the people in New York, and when there is a crisis, the governor is the first person on the scene. He wants to take care of people, and he's a real leader to other people around the state and to all the people in government. So New York State has been devastated by many storms. I think we've had during his time in office, I think we've had about a dozen federally declared disasters, and one of which was Superstorm Sandy. So the governor is in the dark, in the cold, out on Long Island with many people, and he sees that not only people suffering, but he sees that the utility response time is very slow. He accompanies utility crews trying to find equipment using pieces of paper. And it was after that Governor called me up and said, I was working in Washington for the Secretary of Energy, called me up and said, this utility industry is in the vinyl record age at the time of the iPad, and we have to really remake the system. And he's right. And it's not just about resilience, which of course is what he saw in Superstorm Sandy and other major storms in the state, but it's also about affordability, and it's about changing preferences. because the cost of the system is getting more and more expensive. In the last 10 years, we spent $17 billion on the utility sector in the state. In the next 10 years, we're on track to spend $30 billion. And this is just to make the electricity system the same. It's just to rebuild the system that Thomas Edison would recognize. It's not a smarter system. It's not a more resilient system. And at the same time, the cost of producing and distributing electricity in conventional ways is going up. The cost of what are called distributed solutions are going down. So that's not just solar, but it's batteries and fuel cells and combined heat and power. All those costs for distributed solutions are going down, and individuals and communities are looking for more choice and more opportunities to have control over their energy futures. And that certainly came out after these major storms, that communities want to have more control over their power. So that's one of the key motivators behind REV is to drive capital to build not the system of yesterday, but to rebuild the system of tomorrow. So it's an affordability issue, it's a resiliency issue, it's giving customers more choice and value, and we also have to move with much greater alacrity in reducing carbon emissions. And so the good news in all this is the current system is not only financially inefficient, it's also energy inefficient. And so we believe through REV that we can get more value out of the bills that we're already paying for our electricity system to build the system of tomorrow that will be more affordable, that will be cleaner, create more economic development, and give customers more choice and value. And that's another way of saying what REV is trying to do. The current electric grid that we have is a grid where electrons flow in one direction from large power plants over transmission lines, sometimes hundreds of miles to customers. And that's really the system that was built by Westinghouse and Tesla 100 years ago. And it was never designed for distributed solutions such as solar or batteries or fuel cells, where electrons would flow in more than one direction, where there'd be, and in fact, we're still stuck in if you want to think about it in IT terms, we're still stuck in the mainframe world, when really what we need is the system that looks like the IT system of today, which is a combination of the mainframe with the flexibility and innovation of smartphones and PCs. And that's the way the electricity system ought to work. We still need a strong grid with the cost and reliability benefits of big power plants, but we also need the innovation and flexibility of distributed energy resources such as solar, wind, and batteries and fuel cells. We're not building that system today. We're not building that system today because we actually have a policy regime that also didn't anticipate these distributed solutions, and so we've been grafting on both the policies and to the physical infrastructure of the grid, distributed resources, when the policy and the infrastructure itself wasn't designed to incorporate distributed energy resources. So that's why we have a wholesale change in our approach to policy to try to encourage capital, private sector capital, to drive the development of distributed resources, largely in areas where those distributed resources can be good not just for the customers that take advantage of distributed resources, but for all customers. And what I mean by that is that the customers that take advantage of distributed resources can have lower costs, they can have better reliability, they can have better power quality. These are great things for those customers. Now, all customers can benefit, particularly in areas where there are constraints in the grid, because when there are constraints in the grid, it's very expensive to deliver energy to those locations. Electricity flows like water, and so if you have pipes that are very small, it becomes very difficult and expensive and inefficient to deliver electricity to those areas of constraint. So when distributed resources are close to where the demand is, as opposed to hundreds of miles away, it reduces many costs that the utilities would incur. It reduces peak power costs, which is the most expensive cost. You can imagine what power costs in the middle of New York City in the summer, really, really expensive. So if those peak power costs can be reduced, that all customers will save money. There are less line losses, there are less costs for operation and maintenance, and less capital that needs to be deployed. So in the past, the companies that provide solar and other alternative solutions have really viewed the utilities as being the enemy, and I suspect vice versa. They've been competing for customers, and a key part of what REV is trying to do is to change business model and cultures at both the utility and at third-party or innovative companies. And they need to start looking at each other as customers and partners as opposed to just competitors. Because this is really, because by doing that, we think we can deploy more solar and other distributed solutions that'll be cleaner, and that's good for those customers. But also, by an emphasis of deploying these resources in areas in certain locations, it will benefit all customers. And by changing the economic incentives for the utilities can also have a financial incentive to work with innovative third-party companies as opposed to viewing them as competitors. So it's really a situation where we really believe that we can achieve multiple winners. We can have all customers benefit because the system will be more affordable, it will be cleaner, it will create more economic growth as we rebuild this new energy system, and it will be good for solar and other distributed energy resource providers, and it will also provide some financial reward for utilities. And after all, utilities have, under the law, an obligation to serve all customers, and so it is in the public interest to be sure that utilities have enough resources to be able to provide resources for all customers that need it. Justice Brandeis said that states are the laboratory of democracy. And that's certainly happening in energy and climate policy. States are engaged in a range of different policy approaches, and frankly, because of some of the challenges that are taking place at the federal level. So the things that we have our lab in New York. We're very eager to engage with other states that are experimenting also in their labs. We don't claim to have all the answers, but some of the problems that we're wrestling with, we believe other states are wrestling with. So, as an example, I think that in many states, customer preferences are changing. More and more people would like to have more control over their energy. And again, it's not just solar, it's companies deciding that they want to have combined heat and power or fuel cells because not only about resilience, but also a concern about power quality, because companies spend lots of money to protect their electronics. And so having high power quality really can save companies a lot of money. So customer preferences are changing. I think that is an increasing national issue. The other issue is that I think is that we're wrestling with in New York, which many places in the country are wrestling with, which is that overall load growth for the electric utility sector is pretty flat. So if you have customer preferences changing and more and more customers want to have distributed solutions, what's the future role of the utility? How do we continue to invest in the grid and allocate the cost of the grid when many customers still want to be connected to the grid, but aren't necessarily? How much of the cost of the grid are they prepared to incur? So there are the issues about how do we pay for the grid and how are those costs allocated. These are questions which are important policy questions. So that's something that I think many other states are worrying about. I think affordability questions are key to most states, particularly when it comes to businesses. Electricity can be an important cost particularly for manufacturing. And so we have to really ask ourselves, are we really delivering electricity in the cheapest possible way? Climate change is a critical issue for all states, for the globe, and we need to figure out how we're going to be able to integrate more renewable resources and energy efficiency in this current grid and under current regulatory arrangements, which really don't treat energy efficiency, for example, as a business. Instead, in many cases, energy efficiency is a program that's a matter of regulatory compliance as opposed to a business. And so it's not really sustainable if it's just a program. If we're going to integrate renewable resources that are intermittent, the way we've been doing it at this point requires a lot of conventional backup. And a smarter way of doing it would be to imagine being able to pair intermittent resources from renewables with what happens to customers and the ability to adjust customer load to match the intermittency of renewables. So this requires a different kind of grid and different kinds of regulatory policies to promote that. So I think many of the things that we're wrestling with have national and international implications. The unsung heroes I want to talk about are the communities and the individuals that are taking advantage of new technology that gives individuals in more communities control over their energy. And I think just in the same way that communities want to have locally grown food, increasingly communities want to have local cleaner energy. I was at an incubator yesterday, and it gives you a real example of the difference between the way we've been doing things in the past and the way that do things in the future. So energy efficiency is residential energy efficiency pays for itself. And so in New York State, 70% of the houses in New York State are more than 70 years old. And we have policies, lots of policies in the state to give customers grants to retrofit their homes. But these are programs that really, at the current rate of the penetration, they're going to take hundreds of years for the housing stock in New York to be retrofit. So it's not getting the job done in terms of saving people money and reducing emissions. And that's the approach we've been taking. We've been telling people that even though it's in your economic self-interest, we're going to pay you to do a retrofit because you're going to save money and you're going to save the planet. So I was with this small company yesterday at an incubator in Brooklyn, and rather than it being they're looking at it as a program, they're looking at it as a business. And what they have found from their research is really it's about comfort. It's about comfort. And because energy inefficient homes are drafty and unpleasant to live in. So their approach is to talk to people and say, we can make your house more comfortable, and yeah, we'll save you money. In fact, what we'll do is you don't have to put any money down. It will guarantee you savings, and the savings that you earn will pay for the retrofit. Now that turns it away from a program, and it turns it into a business which will create more economic development. It'll retrofit many more houses, and it reflects a way that innovators can take advantage of new technology. In this case, by the way, including the financial technology, not just hardware and software, to really bring about more value. And we see this across communities that want to take more control over themselves in terms of solar. We didn't invent this program. This is another example of other states coming up with things in their lab, and actually in cooperation with the federal government. These solarized programs, we have more than 30 of these programs in the state where communities get together and decide that they want to have more solar in their communities. These happen in people getting together in school auditoriums and people talking to other people and deciding this is something they want to do. We have the same thing that's going on in energy efficiency. Again, energy efficiency has been a problem for policymakers for a long time. How come people don't do energy efficiency? And it turns out that the same kind of idea that people have done with community-based solar programs works for energy efficiency, because entrepreneurs on the ground talking to other people in their community can really make a difference. And so these are the unsung heroes, the individual entrepreneurs and communities that are coming together to take more control over their energy.